The concrete walls of Chicago Police Department's K-9 unit echoed with urgent voices that morning. Rain pelted against the windows, casting grim shadows across the floor as officers rushed through their morning briefings. Everything was proceeding according to protocol, just another day protecting the city. Then, Shadow appeared. He was a magnificent German shepherd, once the department's most decorated K-9 officer before a bullet to his hind leg had forced early retirement. His midnight fur, now peppered with gray around the muzzle, was soaked from the downpour. His dark eyes, which had helped track down countless criminals, now blazed with desperate urgency. Shadow limped through the precinct doors, his injured leg dragging slightly, a permanent reminder of his sacrifice in the line of duty. Officers who recognized him paused, confused by his sudden appearance and the intensity in his gaze. He wasn't barking wildly or spinning in circles. Instead, he moved with deliberate purpose, approaching the desk of Detective Maya Chen, his former handler. "Shadow," Maya whispered, kneeling to meet his eyes. "What are you doing here, boy?" The bond between them had never broken, even after Shadow had been placed in a loving home with Maya's brother across town. The dog pressed his wet muzzle against her palm, then tugged at her sleeve with gentle teeth, his eyes never leaving hers. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. 5 years of partnership had taught her to read Shadow's signals. This wasn't a social visit. "You want me to follow you," she stated quietly. Shadow released her sleeve and took several steps toward the door, looking back expectantly. Captain James Reynolds, watching from his office doorway, frowned. "Chen, what's going on? Isn't that your old partner?" "Yes, sir," Maya answered, already reaching for her jacket. "Something's wrong. He needs to show me something." Reynolds crossed his arms. "We don't have time for K-9 reunions. The West Side case has priority." "With all due respect, sir," Maya interrupted, her voice firm but respectful. "Shadow wouldn't be here without reason. He was the best tracking dog this department ever had." Reynolds' frown deepened. "This isn't protocol, detective. Neither is ignoring a lead," Maya countered, meeting his gaze. "And that's what this is. I know this dog. He's trying to tell us something important." The captain's expression softened slightly. He had been there the night Shadow took a bullet meant for Maya. He'd seen the dog's unwavering loyalty and uncanny intuition that had solved cases deemed impossible. "1 hour," he conceded. "Take Rodriguez with you." Detective Eric Rodriguez looked up from his desk, coffee halfway to his lips. As the department's technology specialist, he preferred screens to streets, but his analytical mind had proven invaluable in the field. "Sir?" Rodriguez questioned. "Go with Chen," Reynolds ordered. "If this dog is onto something, I want it documented properly." Maya nodded gratefully as Shadow paced by the door, his agitation growing visibly with each passing second. Something in his demeanor sent a wave of dread through her. Whatever awaited them, it wasn't good. The rain had intensified as they stepped outside, Shadow immediately taking the lead, his limp more pronounced as he pushed himself forward with determination. Maya and Rodriguez followed, the latter clutching his tablet inside his jacket to protect it from the rain. "I'm not convinced we should be following a retired police dog through a thunderstorm," Rodriguez grumbled, adjusting his glasses as raindrops splattered against the lenses. Maya kept her eyes on Shadow. He once tracked a kidnapper through 3 miles of forest during a blizzard when the trail was 8 hours cold. If he wants to show us something, we follow. The city streets gradually gave way to a more industrial area. Shadow navigated with certainty, occasionally looking back to ensure they were still behind him. His movements became more cautious as they approached an abandoned meat-packing plant, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring out at the dilapidated neighborhood. Shadow stopped at a rusted side door, scratching at it insistently. "This place has been empty for years," Rodriguez whispered, a hint of unease in his voice. "At least it's supposed to be." Maya drew her weapon, motioning for Rodriguez to stay behind her. "Check if there are any reports associated with this address." While Rodriguez worked on his tablet, Maya knelt beside Shadow, whispering, "What is it, boy? What's in there?" Shadow's ears flattened against his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. It wasn't aggression, it was warning. "Multiple complaints about unusual activity," Rodriguez reported quietly. "Strange vehicles at odd hours, lights when there shouldn't be any. Nothing warranted investigation so far." Maya tried the door. It was unlocked. She exchanged a glance with Rodriguez, who reluctantly drew his own weapon. Shadow pressed against her leg, trembling slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. The door creaked open to reveal darkness, broken only by thin shafts of gray light filtering through the dirty windows. The air inside was heavy with the metallic scent of blood mingled with chemicals that burned their nostrils. Maya flicked on her flashlight, revealing a sight that made her breath catch. The abandoned factory floor had been converted into a makeshift laboratory. Tables lined with chemical equipment stretched across the space, illuminated by the beam of Maya's flashlight. But it was what lay beyond the lab that caused her to gasp. Rows of cages containing people, mostly young women and teenagers, many unconscious or barely moving. "Dear God," Rodriguez whispered, immediately reaching for his radio to call for backup. Shadow moved forward decisively, leading Maya deeper into the facility, while Rodriguez coordinated with headquarters. The dog stopped at one particular cage, pawing at the lock and whining softly. Inside, a young girl no more than 16 lay curled on her side, her breathing shallow. Her arms bore track marks and bruises. Maya recognized her immediately from a missing persons report that had crossed her desk 3 weeks ago. Sofia Martinez, Maya breathed, working to pick the lock. Her parents have been searching everywhere. A noise from the back of the facility sent Shadow into alert mode, his body tensing as he positioned himself protectively in front of Maya. 3 armed men emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. "Police, drop your weapons," Maya shouted, taking cover behind a concrete pillar as gunfire erupted. Shadow, despite his injury and years in retirement, moved with the precision that had made him legendary within the department. He circled around the gunfire, using the darkness and his training to approach unseen. The first gunman never saw him coming. Shadow launched himself through the air, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's arm with bone-crushing force. The distraction gave Maya the opportunity to advance, but the second gunman had taken aim at Shadow. Without hesitation, she fired, her bullet finding its mark before he could pull the trigger. Rodriguez had joined the firefight, providing covering fire as more officers stormed the building, responding to his call for backup. The third gunman, realizing he was outnumbered, attempted to flee through a back exit, but was cut off by arriving officers. The gunfire ceased, replaced by the sounds of officers securing the scene and paramedics rushing in to tend to the victims. Maya knelt beside Shadow, who had returned to the cage containing Sofia Martinez. "You knew she was here," Maya whispered, stroking his damp fur. "How did you know?" Shadow simply pressed his nose against the cage again as paramedics worked to free Sofia and the others. The initial assessment revealed the horrifying truth. They had uncovered a human trafficking ring that doubled as a drug production facility. The victims were being used as test subjects for new synthetic drugs before being sold overseas. The operation had been running for months, right under the department's nose. In the chaotic aftermath, Captain Reynolds arrived, surveying the scene with a mixture of shock and grim satisfaction. "If we hadn't found this today," he began, unable to finish the thought. "We wouldn't have," Maya said quietly, her hand resting on Shadow's head. "Not without him." Reynolds knelt before Shadow, reaching out to gently touch the dog's scarred leg. "I guess retirement didn't take, did it, officer?" he said, his gruff voice softening with respect. As the night wore on, the full scope of what they had discovered began to emerge. 23 victims in total, ages ranging from 14 to 22, all reported missing within the last 6 months. The operation wasn't just local. Documents found on computers in the facility linked it to an international trafficking network with connections in 5 countries. Shadow remained by Maya's side through it all, watching intently as evidence was collected and victims were gently escorted to waiting ambulances. His alertness never wavered, even as exhaustion began to set in. Maya noticed him occasionally glancing at Sofia's stretcher as if ensuring she was still safe. "You need rest, boy," Maya said softly, kneeling beside him. Shadow's only response was to lick her hand once before turning his attention back to the scene. By dawn, the rain had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight illuminated the grim scene. News vans had gathered outside the perimeter, reporters clamoring for information about what was already being called one of the largest trafficking busts in the city's history. Captain Reynolds approached Maya, who was still processing evidence while Shadow dozed at her feet, finally succumbing to exhaustion. "How did he know, Chen?" Reynolds asked, nodding toward Shadow. "What made him come find you today of all days?" Maya shook her head. "I don't know yet. My brother lives miles from here. Shadow would have had to travel across half the city to reach the precinct. That kind of dedication deserves recognition," Reynolds said, his usual gruffness giving way to genuine admiration. "The department owes him, and you, a debt of gratitude." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. As the investigation deepened, the connections between the trafficking ring and several high-profile missing persons cases became clear. The media seized on the story of the retired police dog, who had single-handedly led officers to the operation, dubbing Shadow the guardian angel of Chicago. Maya spent hours interviewing survivors, piecing together the puzzle of how the operation had managed to remain hidden for so long. It was during one such interview with Sofia Martinez, now recovering in the hospital, that the mystery of Shadow's appearance began to unravel. "I saw a dog," Sofia said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The day they took me, a German shepherd was watching from a yard across the street." Maya felt her heart skip a beat. "Where was this?" "Oak Ridge Lane," Sofia replied. "Near the park." Maya's brother lived on Oak Ridge Lane. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Shadow had witnessed Sofia's abduction 3 weeks ago, and had somehow recognized her scent at the factory during one of his walks. When he made the connection, he had made the journey to find the only person he knew could help. "He remembered you," Maya told Sofia, her voice thick with emotion, "and he never forgot." Tears welled in Sofia's eyes. "He saved us all." 3 weeks later, the Chicago Police Department held a ceremony unlike any before. The media crowded around the steps of the precinct as Captain Reynolds addressed the gathered crowd. "Today we recognize extraordinary heroism," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed audience. "Behind me stand the officers who helped dismantle one of the largest human trafficking operations in our city's history. But the true hero of that day stands on 4 legs." Shadow sat at attention beside Maya, his coat brushed to a shine, a new custom-made canine vest adorning his powerful frame. The vest bore a special badge, one that had never been awarded before. Shadow served this department with distinction for 7 years before taking a bullet that would have killed Detective Chen, Reynolds continued. After his retirement, he could have lived out his days in peace. Instead, when he discovered evidence of criminal activity near his new home, he traveled nearly 5 miles across the city to alert his former handler. Maya felt tears stinging her eyes as Reynolds approached with a specially crafted medal. "For extraordinary service beyond the call of duty, for courage that transcends retirement, and for saving 23 lives, we reinstate Shadow to honorary active duty, and present him with the department's highest honor for valor." As the medal was fastened to Shadow's vest, the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would appear in newspapers across the country the next morning. Sofia Martinez, now recovering with her family, stepped forward from the crowd, kneeling before Shadow with tears streaming down her face. The dog gently licked her cheek as she wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "I knew you heard me when I called for help." One by one, other survivors came forward, each placing a hand on Shadow's back or offering a gentle pat. The stoic canine stood perfectly still, accepting their gratitude with dignity. Only Maya noticed the slight tremble in his body, the emotion that coursed through him as he understood the impact of what he had done. The ceremony concluded with an announcement that shocked Maya. Captain Reynolds revealed that a special unit was being formed, a cold case division that would specifically utilize retired canine officers to revisit unsolved cases. Shadow would be the first member, with Maya as the unit's commander. "Sometimes the keenest instincts don't fade with retirement," Reynolds declared, "and sometimes the strongest bonds can lead to the strongest results." As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, Maya knelt beside Shadow, pressing her forehead against his. "You ready for one more adventure, partner?" Shadow's response was immediate, a soft woof and a tail that wagged with unmistakable enthusiasm. The impact of the operation extended extended far beyond Chicago. In the months that followed, the evidence gathered led to international cooperation that resulted in the dismantling of trafficking networks in 3 countries. Legislation was introduced to strengthen penalties for human traffickers and to expand resources for victims. Shadow became a symbol of hope and perseverance. Children wrote letters to him. Schools invited him for visits. His image appeared on posters promoting awareness of human trafficking. But through it all, Shadow remained unchanged, focused, dedicated, and always alert. For Maya, the greatest change was seeing the renewed purpose in her partner. Shadow, who had seemed diminished in retirement, now moved with the same confidence and determination he had shown in his prime. The limp in his hind leg was still there, a permanent reminder of his sacrifice, but it no longer seemed to slow him down. 6 months after the rescue, Maya and Shadow visited the rehabilitation center, where several of the trafficking victims were still recovering. As they walked the halls, therapists and doctors stopped to greet Shadow, many having witnessed firsthand the healing effect his visits had on the survivors. "He gives them strength," one therapist explained. "Many of them are dealing with PTSD, but seeing Shadow, knowing what he did for them, it gives them hope. If a dog can be that brave, maybe they can be too." In Sophia's room, they found her sitting by the window, sketching in a notebook. When Shadow entered, her face lit up with a smile that transformed her. Gone was the frail, terrified girl they had found in the cage. In her place was a young woman beginning to reclaim her life. "I've been drawing him," she said, turning her notebook to reveal dozens of sketches of Shadow. "I'm going to art school next year. They gave me a scholarship when they saw these." Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion. "He would be honored to know he inspired you." Sophia knelt before Shadow, gently taking his face in her hands. "You saved more than our lives that day," she told him softly. "You saved our futures." That evening, Maya sat on her apartment balcony with Shadow at her feet. The city stretched before them, lights twinkling in the dusk. She thought about how a single act of courage had rippled outward, touching hundreds of lives, inspiring change that would protect thousands more. "You know what the amazing thing is," she said, stroking Shadow's ear. "You didn't do it for recognition or reward. You did it because it was right, because someone needed help." Shadow looked up at her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. In that moment, Maya understood the depth of wisdom in her partner. Shadow had never seen the world in terms of duty or retirement, awards or recognition. He saw only what needed to be done, and did it without hesitation. "You've taught me more than I ever taught you," she whispered. Shadow rested his head on her lap, sighing contentedly as her fingers ran through his fur. They had both found new purpose in their work with the cold case unit, but these quiet moments together was what mattered most. The trust, the understanding, the bond that had transcended language and time, and even retirement. As the city settled into night, Maya knew that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. Shadow had proven that some partnerships never truly end. They merely evolve into something deeper, something unbreakable. The story of Shadow and the trafficking ring became legend within law enforcement circles. Academies used it in training, emphasizing the importance of instinct and perseverance. K-9 units across the country implemented new protocols that valued the input of handlers who reported unusual behavior in their partners. But perhaps the most profound legacy was the Shadow Initiative, a program founded by Sofia Martinez that trained therapy dogs to work specifically with survivors of trauma. The first dog in the program was a German Shepherd puppy named Guardian, donated by a breeder who had been moved by Shadow's story. 2 years after the rescue, Maya and Shadow stood at the opening ceremony for a new wing of the rehabilitation center, dedicated specifically to survivors of trafficking. A bronze statue stood at its entrance, a German Shepherd in a vigilant stance, watching over all who entered. The plaque beneath it read simply, "Shadow, because courage knows no retirement." As cameras flashed and speeches were made, Shadow sat quietly beside Maya, his posture perfect despite the gray now covering most of his muzzle. Age was beginning to catch up with him, but his eyes remained as alert and intelligent as ever. A young girl approached, holding a small stuffed dog that resembled Shadow. She couldn't have been more than 7, yet her eyes held a wisdom beyond her years. "My sister was one of the people you saved," she said solemnly. "She says you're the bravest dog in the world." Shadow leaned forward, gently touching his nose to the stuffed toy, making the girl giggle. It was a sound that carried healing in its simplicity, the sound of innocence preserved because of one dog's extraordinary courage. Maya watched the interaction, her heart full. Shadow had changed countless lives, including her own. He had reminded everyone, that heroism isn't defined by species or status, or even words. It's defined by actions, by choices made in moments when doing the right thing matters most. As they walked back to the car after the ceremony, Shadow paused, looking back at the rehabilitation center with its new wing and bronze guardian. Maya followed his gaze, understanding what he was thinking without needing words. "Yes," she said softly. "It was all worth it." Shadow wagged his tail once in agreement before turning toward home, walking beside the partner who had always believed in him, even when others saw only a retired dog with a limp. Together, they had rewritten the definition of partnership, of loyalty, of what it means to serve and protect. And in doing so, they had changed their city, their profession, and most importantly, each other. Shadow's legacy would continue in the lives he saved, in the changes his actions inspired, and in the hearts of all who heard his story. But for Shadow himself, the greatest reward was simpler, the knowledge that when it mattered most, he had done what needed to be done. The cold case unit flourished under Maya's leadership, with Shadow at the center of operations. Their first assignment came just weeks after the trafficking case closed, a decade-old kidnapping that had gone cold despite extensive investigation. The victim, a young boy named Daniel, had vanished from a playground while his mother was momentarily distracted. Despite thousands of man-hours poured into the case, no leads had materialized. "I don't know what you expect to find after all this time," the original detective said skeptically as he handed Maya the dusty case files. "Even the best canine can't track a 10-year-old scent." Maya simply smiled. "We're not here to track, we're here to see what everyone else missed." Shadow's approach to cold cases was unlike anything the department had seen before, where human investigators focused on statements, evidence logs, and timelines. Shadow seemed to absorb the essence of each case. Maya would spread photographs, clothing items, and case notes across the floor, allowing Shadow to examine each in his own methodical way. For the Daniel Wells case, Shadow spent hours studying the playground photographs, the small jacket that was the last thing the boy had worn, and the statements from witnesses. At first, nothing seemed to register, and Maya began to fear the skeptics were right. Perhaps some cases were simply too cold. Then, on the third day, Shadow's behavior changed subtly. While examining a map of the search areas, he kept returning to one particular sector, a wooded area 2 miles from the playground that had been searched multiple times in the days following the disappearance. "What is it, boy?" Maya asked, spreading the detailed map wider. "What are you seeing that we didn't?" Shadow placed his paw on a specific location within the search grid, a small pond that had been dragged twice with no results. "The pond?" Maya questioned. Shadow barked once, firm and certain. Rodriguez, who had become an essential part of the cold case team, pulled up the original search reports. The pond was searched on day 3, and again on day 7. Water visibility was poor due to algae bloom, but divers reported no findings. Maya studied Shadow's unwavering focus on the map. "When was the last time the pond was examined?" "Not since the original investigation," Rodriguez answered after checking the records. "It was deemed cleared." Shadow barked again, more insistently this time. "Get a team together," Maya decided. "We're going to re-examine that pond." The next morning, a specialized dive team assembled at the small woodland pond. Years had passed since the original search, and nature had reclaimed much of the surrounding area. The once clear banks were now overgrown with cattails and weeds, and the water was even murkier than described in the original reports. Shadow paced the perimeter, stopping occasionally to sniff the air, his attention never wavering from the water. The dive team prepared their equipment, many of them exchanging skeptical glances. Searching a pond based on a retired police dog's hunch seemed far-fetched, even with Shadow's growing reputation. "What exactly are we looking for?" the lead diver asked as he adjusted his mask. Anything that shouldn't be there, Maya answered, watching Shadow circle to the far side of the pond. And pay special attention to where he's showing interest. The search proceeded methodically, with divers working in a grid pattern through the murky water. After nearly 2 hours with no findings, doubt began to creep in. Even Maya felt her confidence wavering until Shadow suddenly began barking frantically from the northwestern bank. The divers redirected to that area, and within minutes, a shout went up. "We've got something." What emerged from the murky depths wasn't the remains they had feared finding, but rather a waterproof duffel bag, sealed tightly and weighted with rocks. Inside were a child's clothing items, a blanket, and most significantly, a disposable camera, its film somehow preserved within the waterproof casing. When the film was developed, it revealed the final piece of the puzzle, photos taken by the kidnapper showing Daniel alive in what appeared to be a cabin. In the background of one image, a partial address was visible on a mail circular. Within 48 hours, the team had located the cabin, and incredibly, Daniel Wells himself, now a teenager who had been raised believing his kidnapper was his father. The man had staged the disappearance, disposed of evidence in the pond, and relocated to a remote area of Michigan. The reunion between Daniel and his biological mother was bittersweet and complex, but the fact remained, Shadow had solved a case that had defeated an entire department for a decade. How did he know? Reynolds asked Maya privately after the press conference announcing Daniel's recovery. That pond was searched twice. There's no way he could have tracked a scent after all these years. Maya had pondered this herself. "I think it's not just about scent," she answered thoughtfully. "It's about patterns. Shadow doesn't just smell evidence, he reads situations, behaviors. He understood something about this case that pointed to that pond, something we might never have considered. The Daniel Wells case was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, the Shadow-led cold case unit resolved 17 previously unsolvable cases, ranging from disappearances to homicides. Shadow's methods defied conventional explanation, but delivered results that transformed law enforcement approaches to long-dormant investigations. During this time, Shadow and Maya's partnership deepened into something that transcended professional collaboration. They moved in perfect synchrony, each anticipating the other's thoughts and actions. Where once Maya had been the handler giving commands, they now functioned as equals, each bringing their unique perspective to every challenge. Shadow's age continued to advance, the gray spreading across his muzzle and chest, his movements slowing incrementally with each passing month. But his mind remained as sharp as ever, his dedication unwavering. On Shadow's 12th birthday, well beyond the typical service life of a police dog, Maya organized a small celebration at her apartment. Rodriguez brought a specially made cake for Shadow, shaped like a bone and crafted from dog-safe ingredients. Captain Reynolds, now nearing his own retirement, arrived with a hand-carved wooden plaque commemorating Shadow's service record. 37 major cases solved, Reynolds noted, admiring the plaque before presenting it. That's more than most officers clear in a lifetime. Sofia Martinez, now in her 2nd year of art school and a regular visitor in Maya's home, had brought her own gift, a portrait she had painted of Shadow in his prime, standing alert and proud in his canine vest. The resemblance was striking, capturing not just Shadow's appearance, but the intelligence and dignity that defined him. "I tried to show how I see him," Sophia explained as Maya admired the painting. "Not just as the dog who saved us, but as someone who understood what we needed when no one else did." As the evening wound down and guests departed, Maya sat on the floor beside Shadow's bed, a custom orthopedic design that eased the arthritis in his hips and his old bullet wound. He rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. "You know, I used to think I saved you that day in the shooting," Maya said softly, stroking the gray fur around his eyes. "But the truth is, you've been saving me every day since." Shadow responded with a gentle lick to her hand, his dark eyes momentarily bright with the same intensity she'd seen on their very first day of training together. A week later, while investigating an abandoned property connected to a missing persons case, Shadow collapsed. The veterinarians diagnosed advanced heart failure, compounded by the strain of his old injuries. The prognosis was clear: Shadow's remarkable career was finally coming to an end. Maya took him home, transforming her living room into a comfortable space where Shadow could rest while still being part of their ongoing investigations. Rodriguez set up a system of tablets and screens so Shadow could view case materials from his bed. Though physically diminished, his mind remained engaged, his eyes tracking details that others missed. Word of Shadow's condition spread quickly through the department and beyond. A steady stream of visitors came to pay their respects, officers whose cases he'd helped solve, families he'd reunited, and victims whose healing he had facilitated. Sophia came most frequently, often sitting quietly beside Shadow's bed, sketching, or simply talking to him about her day. She had become the lead artist for the Shadow Initiative, designing materials that help trauma survivors connect with their therapy dogs. "You know what the program participants always say about their dogs," she told Shadow one afternoon. "They say the dogs don't see them as victims or survivors or patients. They just see people who need connection. That's what you did for all of us. You saw what we needed when we needed it most." Shadow's final case came to him rather than the other way around. A young officer named Davis arrived at Maya's apartment one evening, apologetic about the intrusion but desperate for help. "We have a missing 3-year-old, he explained breathlessly. "Been searching for 8 hours. The canine units lost the trail at a creek. I know Shadow's retired, but—" Maya looked at Shadow, who had raised his head at the officer's distressed tone. Despite his weakness, his eyes were alert, questioning. "He can't join the search physically," Maya said gently, "but bring us everything you have, maps, the child's clothing, photos of the search area." Within the hour, Maya's living room had transformed into an impromptu command center. Maps and aerial photographs covered every surface as Shadow examined each from his bed, occasionally raising a paw to indicate areas of interest. When presented with a map of the creek where the trail had been lost, Shadow studied it intently before indicating a culvert half a mile downstream, an area that had been overlooked in the initial search because it fell outside the projected travel radius for a toddler. "He thinks the current could have carried the child there if they fell in upstream," Maya interpreted, recognizing Shadow's pattern of analysis from previous water-related cases. Davis radioed the search coordinator immediately. Within 40 minutes, the missing child was found, cold and frightened but alive, having crawled into the drainage pipe after being swept downstream. When news of the rescue reached Maya's apartment, Shadow thumped his tail weakly against his bed, his eyes meeting Maya's with quiet satisfaction. It would be his final contribution, his last save. 2 days later, with Maya beside him and Sophia holding his paw, Shadow took his last breath. He passed peacefully, his head resting on Maya's lap, just as it had countless times throughout their partnership. The city of Chicago mourned collectively. The flag at police headquarters flew at half-mast, an honor typically reserved for officers killed in the line of duty. News outlets ran tributes highlighting Shadow's extraordinary career and the lives he had touched. The funeral procession stretched for miles, police vehicles, canine units from across the state, and hundreds of civilians whose lives had been touched by Shadow's work. At Maya's request, Shadow was laid to rest in a special section of the canine training grounds, where future police dogs would run and train within sight of his memorial. The bronze statue unveiled at his gravesite depicted Shadow not in his later years of honor and recognition, but as he had appeared on that rainy day when he limped into the precinct, determined to save lives despite his own pain and limitations. The inscription read simply, "Shadow, he found the lost, healed the broken, and taught us to see." Maya placed her hand on the cool bronze, feeling the familiar contours of her partner's face one last time. "Goodbye, old friend," she whispered. "Rest now, you've earned it." As she turned to leave, a small movement caught her eye. A German Shepherd puppy, barely 3 months old, had wandered away from a training session nearby. He sat at Maya's feet, looking up at her with intelligent dark eyes that seemed somehow familiar. The training officer jogged over, apologetic. "Sorry, detective, this one's too curious for his own good. We've been trying to find the right handler for him, but he's particular." Maya knelt, meeting the puppy's unwavering gaze. She extended her hand, and without hesitation, he placed his paw in it, a gesture so reminiscent of Shadow that her breath caught. "What's his name?" she asked softly. That's the funny thing, the trainer replied. We've been calling him Echo, but he doesn't respond to it. Almost like he's waiting for the right name. Maya smiled, feeling a familiar warmth spread through her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced the first time she had met Shadow. What do you think of Legacy? She asked the puppy directly. His ears perked up, and his tail swept across the ground in a single decisive wag. The trainer laughed. Well, I guess he's made his choice. As Maya walked back to her car with the puppy trotting confidently at her side, she glanced back at Shadow's memorial one last time. The setting sun cast a golden light across the bronze, making it seem momentarily alive. Shadow's physical journey had ended, but his legacy continued, in the lives he had saved, in the methods he had pioneered, and now, perhaps, in a new partnership, just beginning. The circle remained unbroken. Maya opened her car door, and Legacy jumped in without hesitation, taking his place in the passenger seat, as if he had always belonged there. As she started the engine, she felt a sense of profound gratitude wash over her. Some bonds truly transcended time, outlasting even death itself. Shadow had taught her that, and now, it seemed, he had ensured she wouldn't face the future alone. Ready for a new adventure, partner? She asked. Legacy's answer was a soft woof that echoed with promise, with courage, and with the timeless wisdom of a hero whose legacy would endure as long as there were those who remembered the power of unwavering loyalty and selfless courage. And as they drove away from the memorial, Maya knew with absolute certainty that Shadow's story wasn't ending. It was simply beginning a new chapter.